Welcome to the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Hope Jones. This podcast is designed to encourage and equip you to be a trailblazer right where you are, to help you discover your God-given purpose and bring you talks each week that will inspire you to do what you were made for. So let's get into this week's episode. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Trailblazer Talks. I am so glad that you're here, and I just want to say thank you for hanging out with me every week. It means so much to me that you listen, and I hope that the show is helpful to you, and I hope that it encourages you because honestly, that's my whole goal of doing this show is to be an encouragement to you and help you become all that God created you to be. So thank you for being here. And if you listened last week, you know that we are in a series about quiet leadership. And we're going to continue into that series this week. But first, I thought we could catch up a little bit and just chat about life because I think it's fun sometimes just to break away from some of the teaching aspects of the show and just hear what's going on. And just, I'd love to share some things that I've been loving lately. And I would love to hear from you guys in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or I think on Spotify, you can also comment on the show wherever you listen. If it allows you to comment, I'd love to hear from you. But some things that I have been loving lately is we have gotten a few sporadic warm days recently. And by warm, I mean in the 60s. And going for walks just bring me so much life. And the fact that it's been warm enough for me to go for my usual walks has been bringing me so much joy lately because I don't know about you guys, but for me, going on walks is one of my favorite prayer times where I can really just be out in nature, walking around, praying, talking to God. And I just love it so much. And it's not that I hear God differently when I'm just sitting at my kitchen table or walking around my house, but it's just something so special about going for prayer walks out in your neighborhood, out on wherever you go for walks. For me, it's my neighborhood. And I just have missed that so much in this very long winter that we've been in. And then another thing I've been loving recently too is I've been rereading this book that John Mark Comer came out with a while ago. I remember I read half of it several years ago, but I've been really trying to work with just how full my life has been with my business, a little creative company, and with everything else I do in life. It's just been a very full and good and busy season, but I've been trying to find intentional times for rest and margin and creating more margin in my schedule. So I've been rereading John Mark Comer's book, Garden City. If you haven't read it, it's a really great book, and it's about work, rest, and the art of being human. But it's been really great for me to just add reading back into my schedule because I feel like my default is I'm on a screen all day long. I'm on my computer working because what I do for a living is building websites and designing books and logos and branding and all of that good stuff through my company, little creative company. And because I'm on my computer all day long, and then I'm also scrolling on my phone in between client things and stuff like that, my default is just to do something easy at the end of the day that's just clicking on a TV show, which is yet another screen. And I've been trying more intentionally recently to not turn on the TV as much and pick up a book instead. And it's been so refreshing just to read again because I feel like I fell away from it accidentally. And I think it was because a lot of times I was just so exhausted at the end of the day that reading kind of put me to sleep. So if you have good books that you are loving, send them my way. Send me a DM on Instagram or leave me a comment. And I would love to check it out because I've been trying to get back into the habit of reading more. I've been trying to read a couple different categories of just books for fun, nonfiction books that are in the spiritual category. And then I've also been trying to read more leadership and I don't know what you would call it, work books. Not really, workbook isn't the right term. I guess you would call it continuous learning for my field of category. I'm reading books on sales and leadership and copywriting and things like that that are relevant to my career path. But I've been trying to read a book from each of those categories, and it's just been giving me so much life lately. So if you are loving something right now, I would love to know and just drop me a comment because I really genuinely love hearing from you guys. But let's get into this week's episode. And Last week, we talked about embracing your quiet strength and how leadership isn't just about being loud. And basically, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. And today, we're going to talk about some more actionable and practical ways that you can walk in confidence as an introverted leader, and how to advocate for yourself and communicate effectively and thrive in leadership without feeling like you have to change who you are. And if this series has been encouraging you, I would love if you could share it with a friend, if you could share it on your social media and help me get the word out about our show, because I hear from you guys so often that the show's encouraging you, and I would love, love, love if you guys could share it. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this mini series is because I think I talked about this in last week's episode, but I had posted a piece of content maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. It may have been in the fall. I can't remember, but it really resonated with so many of the people that follow me. And honestly, it was kind of this ode that I wrote for myself, because I remember I was really struggling with just being an introverted leader and being a more quiet person. And I was really struggling with being in this space where I feel called to write and speak and do all the stuff that I feel that God's calling me to do. And then seeing so many other people in this space who are more extroverted, who are the Enneagram type threes and type sevens, and who are very much more bubbly and exciting. And I have struggled with this throughout my speaking career, of feeling like I didn't know where I fit. And I struggled with being more introverted in nature, and I struggled with being more quiet in nature. And I often had to overcome the lie of feeling like the way I was made was a mistake. And I know that that's not true, because God doesn't make mistakes. But I had to struggle through some of those thoughts of being like, God, why did you call me to this area? And you know that I am more gentle and quiet in nature. Why did you call me to this area? And you know that I'm not the loudest person in the room, and I'm not going to be the person to just go up to someone and be like, hey, I'm Courtney, and be all bubbly and just spark up a conversation. I am more timid in a lot of ways, and I am bold when I need to be. But that post stemmed from just some of the things that I was struggling with and about my own personality. And anytime I'm struggling with something, the words just kind of flow. And I just kind of felt like God downloaded this little ode to me for me to share with others too, because I realized that I was not alone in this, and that I'm not the only introvert on the planet. I was like, most of the people we see online, for the most part, seem to be extroverted, bubbly, outgoing people. And you often don't see the introverts, or if you do, because we're not loud, you don't really know that we're there. And so I thought I would read that on the show really quick too, because it was such an encouragement when I posted it on Instagram many months ago. It was probably one of my best performing posts in years. And I'm just going to read it from my phone really quick. So I wrote, to my fellow quiet girls, you are seen and valued. You may not always be the loudest in the room, and sometimes you feel overlooked and unseen, but you matter. You may be labeled as quiet, shy, introverted, or soft, but don't take those labels as a bad thing. They are strength. There's strength in your quietness and peace in your gentle spirit. There's strength in your ability to listen before you speak and to take it all in. There's a discernment in your ability to read a room before diving right into the crowd. You may feel misunderstood at times, but you're always valued. Your gentle leadership and thoughtful approach is needed in this world. There's a seat at the table for you too. Never disqualify yourself just because someone else is louder or maybe more bubbly. We need both the extroverted and introverted personality types in this world. There's nothing wrong with you just because you're on the quieter side. Your personality is needed. Your gentleness is needed. Your discernment is needed. Your quiet approach is needed. God made you just the way you are, and that is a gift. He didn't make a mistake when he gave you more introverted qualities. I know in our world it can be hard to be seen in the crowd of extroverts talking more loudly, but don't stop showing up. Don't ever let someone make you feel less than for the strength that is your quietness. Sincerely, a fellow quiet girl. And that honestly was something that I kind of wrote to myself in a prayer time with God. And it's interesting because for so long, I've kind of struggled with online they always talk about, oh, find your niche, is it niche or niche? I don't know. Either way, I say niche because that's what I've heard so many other people say, but then others say niche, but you know what I mean. But basically, I've been told for so long as a writer to find your niche, to like hone in and find that person and those people that you need to write to, because if you try to write to too many, like too broad of a group, then you're going to miss the people that you're trying to reach. And so it was interesting over the past several months. I've really felt that the more quiet, introverted women are kind of the niche or niche that I'm called to speak into and to kind of help champion just as like my fellow quiet girls. And so I love that you guys wanted this series because it's something that I just realized there is a gap for, and there is room for more women in this arena, in this space. And a lot of the content and things that we see online is not necessarily geared for us. So I hope you have found like some kind of solace in this series that I've been doing and just the like content I've been focused on recently. So now let's get into some of the practical ways that we can build our confidence in our skill set as quiet leaders. And I actually asked on my Instagram this week for any questions that you guys wanted to make sure that I covered. And I did get one question that I wanted to make sure to answer in this episode. And the question was, have you ever struggled with self-doubt in leadership, and how did you move forward? And I loved this question because it actually ties in really perfectly with the whole outline that I had come up with for this week's episode. So I'm going to answer this question first, and then we can kind of dig into more practical steps. But the answer is yes, absolutely. I have absolutely struggled with self-doubt before in leadership. And I've also struggled with it in the sense of not having a leadership title and having self-doubt, because I often thought that being a leader is reserved for those with the title, and realizing that you don't have to have a title to be a leader, that you could be a leader right where you are. And I've struggled with self-doubt before in opportunities where I did have a leadership title and leadership position. I've had the opportunity to lead many small groups, and I have doubted my abilities before and doubted who God made me to be, because I struggled with feeling qualified for those positions. I've also struggled with opportunities where I got to lead a graphic design team at one of my old churches, and I struggled with feeling qualified for that. And I think we see this so often throughout scripture. I mean, I talked about it last week where Moses felt unqualified to go lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And there's so many different stories throughout scripture. Peter felt disqualified, Paul, like so many people I could list throughout the Bible who felt disqualified or felt like they second guessed who God made them to be to do the thing that God called them to do. And so, yes, the short answer is yes, I have struggled with doubt in leadership. And how did I move forward was by just continuing to show up and by praying through it and asking God for strength and for God to basically allow me to be the vessel and for him to speak through me. And that's something that I pray often. I often pray, God, please purify my heart. Help me to be a pure, empty vessel for you to use and to pour out through me. And I often ask God to speak through me. I don't always have the perfect words. I'm not always going to get it right. And I think when we take the pressure off of ourselves to be perfect and to say the exact right thing, and we just allow God to move in the situation, whether he gives us the perfect words or not, I think that's how we overcome that self-doubt in leadership, or when we're given a leadership opportunity, is just own the opportunities that God has given you and show up and just do the best you can. And that's just with any job in general, whether you are actually in a leadership position or whether you are leading from just the position that you're in. Throughout my career, when I was in the corporate world, I never led a team of people just the way that the hierarchy was at the company that I worked for. There was never an opportunity for me to even try to get a leadership position, but that doesn't mean that I didn't get to lead in the corporate world in the position I was in. I often had to lead what they call leading up and also leading down, where I needed to often manage up to my managers, and I often needed to have opportunities to manage my managers in a sense. And then I also had opportunities to help lead with onboarding and new people on our teams to help get them up to speed. And so there are leadership opportunities no matter what position or title you have. And we just have to take every opportunity we can to make sure that we are being vessels for God and we're glorifying God and we're mindful with the words that we use towards others. And I love all these different leadership books, like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is a great one. And there's just so many great principles in those types of books that we can learn in how to be great leaders, and even just leadership principles in the Bible and looking at how Jesus led and how different leaders throughout scripture led. Hopefully that can be encouragement for you just to push through the awkwardness and just show up exactly as you are, and don't let others make you feel afraid or less than for being an introverted leader. Okay, so the first area that I want to cover is how to advocate for yourself without being loud. I know that one of the biggest struggles for introverted leaders can be advocating for themselves. And this is something that I've had to grow a lot in throughout my career, because it's kind of twofold. Being a Christian and being introverted, I feel like also makes me extra like meek sometimes, and feeling like, well, if God wanted me to have it, it would just fall in my lap. Or if I'm meant to do this, someone will approach me. Or if I'm meant to have whatever it is, it's just going to happen on its own. But what I've realized is we have to advocate for ourselves for opportunities. And that's not being not humble, if that makes sense. Like, I think sometimes we don't do things out of this false sense of humility where we're like, I don't need this. Like, it's okay. Like, you can pick someone else. And we kind of have this false sense of humility where we think that we're just being humble by not seeking an opportunity or whatever, when really, if God called us to do something, it's being disobedient to not go after the thing that God called us to do and not show up for the thing that God called us to do. And that's not actually being humble by not doing the thing that God's called us to do. It's just being disobedient. And so I think we have to advocate for ourselves as introverts, because we are quiet and we are more reserved, that oftentimes people don't even know the opportunities that we're looking for. They don't know the things that we have to say if we don't speak up for ourselves. And a couple ways, practical ways that can actually help us with this is, one is just the power of prepared communication. And this is something that has helped me oftentimes with different meetings and different things, because I know myself, and maybe you relate to this because if you're a quiet girly or guy listening and you're also introverted, you probably struggle with this too. But we are deep thinkers as introverts. And oftentimes when someone asks us to answer a question or to weigh in on a conversation, we really want to give our answer a lot of thought. Like, we want to make sure that we have thought through every scenario, that we're not just spitballing things. And sometimes that can cause us to miss out on even answering a question. And so as introverts, since we process information internally before we speak, this is a strength, but we have to kind of come prepared to situations when possible so that we aren't caught off guard in the moment. And a practical tip is, if you do struggle to speak up during meetings or discussions, make sure you take a little bit of time before going to a meeting or a speaking opportunity or whatever it is, to kind of just come up with some like prepared answers ahead of time, or prepared notes, like just bullet point type of things. Like, I know when I was in the corporate world, if I was going into a marketing presentation, which I often had to give weekly to present creative or to present an idea or a marketing strategy or whatever it was, I did not go into that meeting blind. And I tried to think through, what are some questions that the CMO might ask me? Because I remember early on in my career going into a meeting and I was prepared to present the material that I had to present. What I wasn't prepared for was the questions that I was going to get asked in response to that creative, and some of the different scenarios that may have occurred through this creative. And so I remember leaving that meeting feeling so defeated. I actually went in the bathroom and cried because the meeting did not go at all how I thought it was going to go. They did not like the creative. It just was a rough meeting. And it wasn't anything that was against like my qualities. It was just my inexperience. And I wasn't prepared to answer some of the questions they had. And I held it together in the meeting, but I remember leaving that meeting and I just was kicking myself because I was like, why didn't I think to answer those questions or whatever? And so I think the more prepared you can try to make yourself be for different situations, the better. And also getting more comfortable with answering off the cuff with things. And that's something that I've had to do throughout my career because I realized didn't if I wasn't one of the first people to speak or I wasn't quick to speak, I missed my opportunity. And then I missed opportunities to get other promotions and leadership opportunities at work. I remember it was probably like a year before I ended up leaving the corporate world. There was a position that opened that it was like what I wanted my whole career. And I had made it known in some of my performance reviews that I wanted this position someday, but I didn't make it clear enough. I wasn't as forward as I should have been about it. And by the time the opportunity opened and I was forward, they had already promised it to someone else who came forward before me and what made it extremely known that they wanted the position. And so I have learned throughout my career that I have to be kind of quicker on my toes, that not everything needs a deep answer. And even though I'm wired that way, I've had to modify it in some regards in certain scenarios so that I am a little quicker on my toes. And then the second way is speaking with clarity and confidence and not second guessing what you have to say. It's similar to when we used to take tests in school and they would say, just go with your gut answer. Like, don't second guess the answer that you put on your Scantron. Just go with your gut. And usually that's the right answer. And this is the other thing is you don't have to talk a lot to be heard. You just need to make your words count. And if you think about Jesus, he didn't use a ton of words at times. Like there were often times where he used very few words, but whenever he did speak, his words carried a lot of weight and they had a lot of meaning. And I think we just have to make sure that whenever we do speak up in different situations to advocate for ourselves, that we speak confidently and clearly and we don't second guess it. And this is something, again, that I have learned in my career, especially when presenting something like for me as a marketing professional, presenting creative to someone. I needed to be confident in my ability. I needed to be confident in what it was that I was presenting, because if I wasn't confident about it, then the CMO or the different people that I was presenting this creative to weren't going to be confident either. And the other thing that we need to remember is letting our actions speak. Not all leadership is verbal, and some of the most powerful leadership can come through example. And oftentimes our body language plays a huge role into our communication. If you are in a meeting and you might be speaking clearly, but you're kind of hunched over and you're like, got your arms crossed or whatever, or if you are like got your legs kind of crossed or you're like shifting around or whatever. Like if I were sitting here and if you're watching me on YouTube, if I was sitting here and I was like kind of like rolling in my chair a little bit, or if I was like, hey guys, thanks for coming to my podcast. Yeah, so this week we're just going to talk about, you would be like, man, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about. You would be like, I don't know if I want to listen to this show. She seems like super uncertain. But instead, if I'm sitting up straight and I'm talking clearly and confidently to the camera, and if you're not watching me on YouTube, sorry, hopefully you kind of get what I was just trying to do. But it basically helps for us to let our actions speak. And sometimes it's just taking certain actions that speak louder than words. And it's helping someone in need, or it's going the extra mile on a project or something like that that can speak volumes in advocating for ourselves. And the last area I want to dig into is just building relationships and influence as an introvert, because this is something that's so important as introverts, to make sure we don't just sit at home and kind of isolate ourselves, which can be easy, that we don't use our introvertedness as an excuse to not show up, but we show up regardless of our personality type. And we find ways to thrive as introverts, no matter where we show up. And a lot of people assume that introverts struggle with networking or building influence, but the truth is we just do it differently. And instead of thriving in large groups, we do much better in meaningful one-on-one conversations or smaller groups. And that's something that we can really lean into. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out this week and find the biggest networking group that you can find and go to it. It just means that we just need to be intentional with the people that are in our lives and the places we do show up to, and not shy away from opportunities. And one of the first things that we can do is lean into those deep, meaningful connections. And again, like, you don't have to work the whole room. You can just focus on like one or two solid connections if you are at a networking thing, or if you are at like a big meeting at work, or if you are at school, or whatever, wherever you find yourself in life listening to this. For example, like in leadership, one strong connection can open more doors than a dozen surface level ones. And this is so true for me in my career. I remember in college, so my major was advertising and my minor was marketing. And I was in one of the marketing programs at the University of Alabama. And we had this opportunity through this like business fraternity type of program where we could get paired with a mentor. And I got paired with an amazing mentor. Michelle, if you're listening to this, I love you. And that connection, that one meaningful connection, ended up propelling me into the rest of my career. Connecting with Michelle, who was the CMO at the company that I ended up working for my second year out of college, ended up being one of the most meaningful connections for my career, versus if I had just endlessly gone. Because I remember my senior year of college, I went to so many different networking things. I wanted to move to Nashville so badly that I even drove from Tuscaloosa up to Nashville to go to the AAF, the American Advertising Federation networking groups. And I don't remember a single person from those groups. But to this day, Michelle has been one of the most impactful people in my life. And so that's just an example that making meaningful one-to-one connections can be so much more powerful than a dozen surface level ones. And sometimes we have to talk to a dozen people to find that meaningful one conversation or connection. But I think also the follow-up from those conversations is what creates those meaningful connections. Like, not just letting it be a one and done conversation. Like, if you really connect with someone, follow up with them, stay in contact with them. Don't let that connection kind of fall by the wayside. And the second thing too is the power of encouragement and thoughtful influence. And this is obviously what I try to do through all the stuff that I put out online, is have an encouragement and a thoughtful influence with what I do. I never want to just leave people with empty thoughts. I never want to just be another voice in the like many voices that are out online. And research actually shows that introverts tend to be more observant and empathetic, which makes us great at offering encouragement and insight. And just a practical tip with this is, if you struggle to start conversations, start with encouragement. Give someone a compliment, or tell them like, hey, I really appreciated what you shared in that meeting. Like, I mentioned this last week, people love to talk about themselves. And so if you can walk up and be like, oh my gosh, I love your jacket. Where did you get it? Or, oh my gosh, your shoes are so cute. You look stunning, or something like that. Like, they will be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And it'll like spark a conversation. Or if someone gave a presentation, always make sure, like, if you want to make a connection with that person, have a thoughtful interaction with them where you compliment them for speaking well. And then the last way for this area that I want to talk about is using social media to build influence. If you are wanting to be in this arena that I find myself in, if you're wanting to start a podcast or a YouTube channel, or you want to be a Christian speaker or author or whatever it is, or if you're just wanting to grow your business or your career, use social media to help you build influence without draining yourself. If these large networking events can feel overwhelming, you can use Instagram or LinkedIn to connect in a way that maybe feels more natural. And you can just do it as simply as commenting on someone's post with a genuine insight, or just replying to someone's story. And I know that can be scary sometimes, but honestly, just start with commenting on a post and saying something nice. And then kind of working your way up. Someone told me recently, they're like, I don't know how you talk on your stories so much as an introvert because that terrifies me. And I'm like, honestly, it just feels like I'm FaceTiming myself because I'm just staring at myself. But I just have to like not worry about what someone might be thinking of what I'm saying on my story, because I know that I'm being obedient by showing up on social media and talking about my day or talking about something fun or giving an encouragement. And there were definitely times where I struggled with fear of man. And that's like a whole nother episode I could do. But basically, like, just show up and try it. And the more reps you get in, the easier it will become. So I know this has been a lot in this episode, but I hope that it is encouraging. And if you take away one thing from this episode, let it be this: your quiet nature is not a weakness, and you don't have to be someone you're not to lead well. And you just have to embrace the strength that God's already given you. And you'll just be so surprised with how God continues to show up when you be exactly who He called you to be. So, this week's challenge: just write down 3 strengths that you bring to leadership as an introvert and practice advocating for yourself in one small way this week, whether it's speaking up in a meeting or setting a boundary or engaging in meaningful conversation. But I'd love to hear how this resonated with you. Send me a DM on Instagram or leave a comment. And don't forget to listen to part 1 if you haven't yet, and share this with a friend. But I'll see you guys in the next episode.